Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kiwi College. I'm Sarah Smith. I'm the editor of Kiwi Magazine. And I'm so excited that we were able to partner with the nonprofit Healthy Child, Healthy World today to bring you our fantastic speaker, Dr. Philip Landrigan. We're also joined by Margie Kelly from Healthy Child. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about Dr. Landrigan. But before she does, I just want to let everyone know that we're going to have a Q&A session after the main presentation, and you can type your questions in at any time while Dr. Landrigan is speaking and during the Q&A portion, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can a little bit later. So Margie and Dr. Landrigan, thank you so much for joining us here in Kiwi College. And please, Margie, tell us more about Healthy Child, Healthy World, and about Dr. Landrigan.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's an honor to be here today, and it's such a thrill to get to introduce Dr. Landrigan. Healthy Child, Healthy World is a nonprofit organization that inspires and informs parents about environmental threats to their children and what they can do to protect their kids and lead a healthy, happy life together. But Dr. Landrigan is someone very special to Healthy Child, Healthy World, and actually to all of us, whether you know him or not. Dr. Landrigan has been known for his many decades of work protecting children against environmental threats to health. He's a pediatrician, epidemiologist, and has been internationally recognized for his work. He's had such a huge impact on children's health. It's not an exaggeration to say his work has really changed the world and the lives of children, particularly for his work on lead and pesticides. It was Dr. Landrigan's pioneering research on lead toxicity at low levels that persuaded the U.S. government to mandate removal of lead from gasoline and paint. This one result has led to a 90% decline in incidence of childhood lead poisoning over the past 25 years. So just that alone would have been an incredible lifetime accomplishment, but there's so much more. Dr. Landrigan has led the first study to prove children are uniquely susceptible to the effects of pesticides, finding standards to base quote-unquote safe doses of chemicals to the impact on a 150-pound adult man, and that standard is inadequate to protect children's health. He's been a leader in developing the National Children's Study, the largest study of children's health and the environment ever launched in the U.S. He's published more than 500 scientific papers, 5 books, and he's done so much more outside this even realm of children's health. I could go on for far too long, but let's just say that we're so honored to be partners with Dr. Landrigan, and for all these reasons, Healthy Child, Healthy World awarded him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and it was the very least we could do. So Dr. Landrigan, thank you so much for the inspiration and the actual impact you've made on children's lives.
Margie, thank you so much. Sarah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. So I'm going to talk for maybe 20 minutes plus or minus, and the talk will basically divide into 2 parts. First of all, I'm going to give you a quick overview of current trends in children's environmental health, what's happening to chronic disease in children, what's happening to children's exposures to chemicals, basically an overview of the current situation. Then I'll follow that with a discussion about practical advice. What are tips? What are simple solutions that parents themselves can take, very feasible, very cost-effective approaches to reducing the exposure of pregnant women and young children to toxic chemicals. So that's sort of the framework, so let's get to it. So let's begin by asking the question, why should we be concerned about the connections between the environment and children's health? Well, first of all, because rates of disease in children in this country are rising, have been rising substantially for the past 25 to 30 years. Secondly, there have been big changes in the environment over the past half century. Today there are more than 80,000 new synthetic chemicals that have been produced. These are chemicals that did not exist in 1950. They're found all around us in air, in drinking water, in the air we breathe, in products that we use every day, in food that we eat. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, an agency of the federal government based in Atlanta, does national surveys every year. They take blood samples and urine samples from people all across the United States, and they find that more than 200 of these chemicals are present in measurable levels in the bodies of virtually all Americans. So these are not just chemicals that are out there in strange and faraway places. They are chemicals that are in all of us. And the most worrisome problem is that the majority of these chemicals have never been tested to determine whether or not they have harmful effects on children. The hope, of course, is that most of them are not harmful, but as a pediatrician, as a father, I find it very worrisome that chemicals that are in me, that are in my wife, that are in our children, are chemicals, 80% of them are chemicals whose potential toxicity is quite unknown to us. This is very worrisome. There's no guarantee that these chemicals are safe, and yet they're in us. And I think this is a situation that needs to be fixed in this country, and we can come back to that perhaps in the Q&A. Now, the next point I want to do is talk about some of the trends in children's disease. We're learning that chemicals in the environment cause disease in children, actually cause disease, not just associated with it. We're learning that diseases caused by toxic chemicals are preventable. You heard Margie in the introduction mention the work that I was involved in many years ago to get lead out of gasoline. We found that when we removed lead from gasoline, we prevented environmental exposure to lead. We reduced that exposure by over 90%, and the consequence was an enormous decrease, between 90 and 95%, in the incidence of childhood lead poisoning in this country. That success can be repeated time and again. It can be repeated for other chemicals like air pollution, like phthalates, like pesticides that we're going to be talking about this morning. These exposures truly can be prevented. One problem at the national scale is that only a tiny fraction of the national medical budget is directed towards preventing diseases caused by environmental exposures. Pretty much 98% of the healthcare dollar that's spent in this country goes to treating people who are sick. Now, we all agree that sick patients need treatments, but at the same time, even in a time of short budgets and constrained finances, I think it makes a lot of sense to increase the amount of money that we put into prevention. As I'll discuss in a few minutes, diseases caused by toxic exposures are very, very expensive, and money invested in prevention is going to yield a great return in terms not only of less disease, less misery, but also financial savings. And that basically brings us to the bottom line, that we have to take intelligent action. We have to be smart if we're going to prevent disease in our children and in ourselves. We can't just blithely go about our lives and not look around us. We learned as little kids to look both ways before we cross the street. It's the same with chemicals. We have to look around us, we have to see what the threats are, and we have to take actions to protect ourselves and our families. So here's some data. I want to show you some actual information on rates of disease in children. This slide shows rates of asthma in the United States since 1982. And you can see that since the 1980s, in other words, over the past 30 years, rates of asthma have more than doubled in this country, and the highest rate of increase has been in children. The next slide shows about childhood leukemia, and it's a very similar picture. There has been a very steady increase in the incidence of childhood leukemia over the past 40 years. The good news about childhood cancer is the death rate has gone down. The death rate has gone down because we've learned how to treat cancer. But the number of new cases per 100,000 children has been steadily rising, and that is cause for great concern. Developmental disabilities, which are basically disorders of the brain and nervous system, affect 10 to 15% of all American children. They include dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, mental retardation, and autism. Anybody who's read the paper has read that the incidence of autism and attention deficit disorder is increasing. The most recent reports from the Center for Disease Control indicates that some form of autism now affects one child in 88 in this country. In other words, more than 1% of American babies are affected by autism spectrum disorder. And that's a very substantial increase from even 6 years ago, not to speak of a decade ago. Now, I mentioned a moment ago, here are some data that disease in children of environmental origin is very expensive. This is information that was produced by Dr. Leo Trisandi, a colleague who was previously at Mount Sinai and now at New York University. He did an economic analysis that was published a year ago. The bottom line in Dr. Trisandi's analysis is that disease in American children caused by toxic chemicals in the environment cost this country $76.6 billion every year, every single year. That is why I say that even a small increase in the investment we make each year in prevention of disease is going to give a very big payoff. So what are some of the specific threats to children's health? Let's go through them. And how can we protect our kids? Well, first of all, I want to talk about 4 common threats that we run into in our everyday lives. These are phthalates, bisphenol A, flame retardants, sometimes called brominated flame retardants, and pesticides. So let's talk about phthalates first of all. What are phthalates? Phthalates are man-made chemicals that get into the human body and they interfere with the endocrine system. So let me take a minute and explain what the endocrine system is. The endocrine glands are a series of organs in the human body that all have in common the fact that they secrete chemicals called hormones. Those hormones go from the glands into the bloodstream and circulate around in the body and powerfully influence growth, development, behavior, or a whole state of health. Some of the endocrine glands are the pituitary, the thyroid, the pancreas, the adrenal glands, in boys the testes, and in girls and women the ovaries. All of these glands secrete hormones into the bloodstream which then circulate through the body and change the way our body behaves. For example, thyroid hormone increases metabolism. Adrenaline from the adrenal glands is released in large quantities when we're in a situation of danger, and it enables us to run very fast. Testosterone from the testes influences male development. Estrogen from the ovaries influences female development. In very tiny quantities, these chemicals can exert powerful effects. And therefore, any chemical that gets into the human body and scrambles endocrine signaling can have very important consequences. The highest levels of these chemicals are found in young women of reproductive age and children, and that's because young women use a lot of personal care products that contain phthalates, because plastic food containers contain phthalates, and these chemicals get from personal care products, shampoos, cosmetics, food containers into women and children. And these chemicals can produce a range of health effects, and these health effects are especially serious if the exposure to the baby occurs during pregnancy. In other words, if the mother puts these chemicals on her body or gets them into her body, they move from the mother's bloodstream into the baby's bloodstream, they get into the body of the baby, and they have bad outcomes. One effect that phthalates can have is that they have adverse effects on reproductive development, especially in baby boys. They decrease masculinization of the baby boy in the mother's womb. Another effect is that they can accelerate the onset of puberty, make puberty occur earlier than it would otherwise appear. And it can thirdly have problems on development of the brain and nervous system. There are 2 types of phthalates, high and low molecular weight, and this graph shows where they're found. The high molecular weight are found in vinyl products, building materials, children's toys. And the low molecular weight products are the ones found in personal care products, fragrances, cosmetics, and also on the coating of certain medications. How can parents prevent exposures to themselves during pregnancy and to their children? Well, first of all, you want to look at the little recycling mark at the bottom of each plastic bottle, each plastic container. Number 3 plastics can contain phthalates, so they should be avoided. So also avoid personal care products that can list the word fragrance among the ingredients. Fragrance is a code word that often means that phthalate is present. Never cook, never microwave in plastic, because cooking can drive the phthalate out of the plastic into the food. Watch out for certain nail polishes and other cosmetics. If you go to the website that I've listed here, www.ewg.org/skin-deep, this contains a list of personal care products maintained by the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, and it tells you which products are safe and which are not safe to use. Okay, moving on to bisphenol A, sometimes called BPA. It's also used in plastics. It's also like phthalates. It's an endocrine disruptor. Studies conducted by CDC show that BPA is present in 95% of the American population. Its health effects include hyperactivity in kids, impaired learning, like phthalates, early puberty, and possibly increased risk of breast cancer. Just as in the case of the phthalates, exposures that take place during pregnancy are the most hazardous. So women should be taking active steps to avoid these chemicals during pregnancy and also for the 3 to 6 months before they get pregnant, so that the chemicals are washed out of their body before they conceive a pregnancy. And neurodevelopmental impairments. Where is BPA found? It's found in plastic bottles, like the plastic bottles that people carry to soccer games. It's found in baby formula canisters. It's found in the inner linings of metal cans, not all metal cans, because in fact some manufacturers have gotten the message in the last few years and are now proudly advertising that their cans are BPA-free. But unless a can is said to be BPA-free, assume that it contains BPA. It's on the thermal receipt paper that you get at the bank and the supermarket, that yellow copy, which is behind the primary copy. And it's used in dental sealants and dental filling materials for children. How to prevent exposure? Again, check the recycling symbol at the bottom of each plastic bottle. Plastics with the label number 7 may contain BPA and should be avoided. So you want to buy BPA-free bottles. In fact, the best way to get BPA-free bottles is to get away from plastic entirely and buy glass or stainless steel. You want to avoid canned foods and beverages unless they're labeled BPA-free. And this is one more reason to eat fresh foods when you can. Wash your hands after you go to the market. It's probably a good practice anyway, but it certainly gets off your skin the BPA that will have wiped on there from the cash register receipts. Okay, moving right along, what are flame retardants? Flame retardants are synthetic chemicals based on bromine, based on the element bromine, that are used in certain products, in mattresses and pillows, furniture, curtains, computers, television monitors. And the problem is the brominated compounds don't stay in the mattresses or the pillows or the other products. They get out, they get into the dust of your home, they get into your hands, from the dust, from your hands, from your child's hands, they get into the human body. And they can have negative effects. There's some information that exposure of pregnant women to brominated flame retardants can result in loss of IQ in their children. So how do you prevent exposure? Well, first of all, if you have an old furniture that has exposed foam, cover it over with a plastic case or a slip cover. That will keep the brominated flame retardants in the foam and prevent it from escaping into your room. To the extent you can, buy products that are made from natural fibers. These natural fibers like cotton and wool are naturally less flammable than synthetics like nylon, and they do not contain brominated flame retardants. You want to keep children from touching, and most importantly, keep them from mouthing on fire retardant items. And be very careful when you're tearing up old carpet, because PBDEs, which stands for polybrominated diphenyl ethers, a type of flame retardant, is often found in the backing or the carpet itself, and the dust that flies everywhere when you tear up the carpet can spread this stuff around the house. What about pesticides? Pesticides are synthetic chemicals that are used to make lawns green and to kill weeds. Children can be exposed when they're playing on the lawn. They can track the stuff into the house. They can also be exposed to pesticides that are applied to fruits and vegetables. Unless the fruits and vegetables are labeled organic, they almost certainly contain pesticides. And of course, pesticides are also used in the home. People spray pesticides under the sink, around the baseboards to control cockroaches and other pests. But these pesticides have toxic effects on children and have toxic effects if they get into a pregnant woman and then into her unborn child. And so it's very important to minimize exposure to pesticides, especially for pregnant women and young children. And some of the health effects of pesticides include injury to the developing brain that can cause learning difficulties in children, loss of IQ points, and those are the effects of pesticides. Now, how can we prevent exposure to pesticides? First of all, don't use pesticides on your lawn. Just don't do it, especially if you're pregnant or you have small children in the family. Learn to live with a few dandelions. Switch to species of grass that don't require so much pesticide. There are many alternative approaches. I invite you to go onto Google and look up what's called Integrated Pest Management, IPM, which will give you a whole recipe of strategies that you can use to reduce your pesticides. Go to Maria Rodale's books, Organic Gardening, learn how to live without pesticides. Take your shoes off before you come into the house, which is a good thing to do anyway because it keeps street dust from getting into the house. But one specific effect of taking off your shoes is that it keeps out the pesticides. Wash your fruits and vegetables thoroughly, and eat stuff that's in season, and to the extent possible, eat organic. If you go to the website of the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, the same website I mentioned a few minutes ago in connection with the cosmetics, they also have information on which produce is safe and which produce is not so safe. And I recommend that you go to ewg.org to check that out. The Dirty Dozen are the vegetables that contain the highest levels of pesticides. You can avoid that problem completely if you buy organic. And here's the list taken from ewg.org. And this information will be posted on the website afterwards, so you don't have to write furiously at this moment. And then there are the Clean 15. These are the fruits and vegetables that contain the lowest levels of pesticides. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. To summarize, I've very briefly presented to you trends in disease in American children, showed you how various diseases such as asthma, childhood cancer, learning disabilities are increasing in frequency in American children. I presented you data showing how widespread chemicals are in today's society. Thousands of chemicals are used in products. Hundreds of synthetic chemicals are present in all of us. Most of them have never been tested for their potential toxicity. And then I've concluded by presenting a series of simple steps, highly feasible, cost-effective actions that you can take to protect yourselves and your families against pesticides. This concluding slide shows how you can get in touch with us, how you can sign up for our newsletter, how you can visit our website at the Children's Environmental Health Center at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. So with that, I'll conclude. I'll give the microphone back over to Margie or Sarah, and I believe we shall be open for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landergan. Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Smith again from Kiwi. And Doctor, thank you so much. That was really interesting information. And there's some scary stuff there, but having those really straightforward, how to avoid these things, advice from you is makes it much less frightening. So thank you for all of that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah.
So we are already getting some questions in, some great questions in from our audience. So and I see more as I'm talking. So let's jump right to them. So we have a question. You were talking about BPA earlier, and someone wants to know about the replacement chemicals that companies are using instead of BPA. She mentioned BPS, which is one I don't know, and maybe you do, but I've heard of some others. I wondered if you could speak to what we should know about the alternatives to BPA.
Yeah, and that's a good question. And those alternative chemicals are very problematic. The fundamental problem is that we know even less about those alternative chemicals than we know about BPA. In other words, this is history repeating itself. It's once again the chemical industry, who are very clever, very smart people working in the chemical industry, very good at developing new products and getting them to market. But the problem is that as a society, we have failed miserably to put safeguards in place that require new chemicals to be properly scrutinized before they come to market. I mean, you would never buy a house, you would never buy a car without looking it over and test driving it and making sure that it ran safely. And yet, every week of the year, we bring new chemicals to market, we put them into consumer products, we distribute them widely in our society with no due diligence whatsoever. It's very clear that the federal law, which regulates the introduction of new chemicals to market, is not working and needs to be rewritten. And that's something that needs to be addressed down in Washington. But in the meantime, while we wait for Washington, what parents can do is take matters into their own hands and basically avoid products that contain either BPA or BPA substitutes. That's why I suggested that instead of going to plastic containers, go to stainless steel. Instead of eating canned food or food from plastic packages, eat fresh produce. And that's the way to basically get to the root of the problem and solve it.
Great, that makes sense, yep. We have someone who's concerned that her prenatal vitamin, which is a gel cap, might have phthalates in it. Does that happen? Should she look for another one?
Yeah, she should look for vitamins that are phthalate-free.
Okay, and will it say that, do you know, on the packaging? How would you, or just look
You may
for
have
ones that aren't gel caps?
It may not say so. She may have to write to the manufacturer.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so being proactive and finding out from people what they're using. Yeah.
Exactly.
How about dental sealants? Do you recommend that children not get them at all? Is there an alternative?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
We did a very careful analysis of this several years ago, and we published it in the journal called Pediatrics. And what we found was that when dental sealants are installed, or when some of the new plastic filling materials are installed into a child's teeth, there is a brief release of bisphenol A that lasts for a couple of hours at most. We also found that it's possible to reduce the absorption of the BPA into the child's body by two very simple steps. One is request that the dentist place what's called a rubber dam inside the child's mouth. This is a piece of rubber that keeps the child from swallowing the saliva that contains the BPA, and instead the stuff gets sucked out into that little suction device the dentist uses. And the second thing is, if the dentist simply wipes down the filling after it's been installed, that gets rid of a huge amount of the BPA and reduces the child's exposure. On balance, I think that these BPA sealants and BPA fillings are very, very beneficial for kids' health. Children need good, strong teeth, and it's very important that their teeth be protected. But Parents need to work with their dentist to make sure that the dentist uses the rubber dam and wipes down the teeth afterwards. And then the exposure is cut by 80 or 90%.
Oh, wow, great. We have a number of questions about flame retardants. One person was wondering about is the dangers of the bromide that you were talking about. Is that in the children's flame retardant sleepwear too? And then should that be avoided? And then someone else was wondering, what about, should we just if you think you have a crib mattress that has it, should you replace it entirely?
I think it's always easier to deal with these things at the front end. It's always easier to deal with products before you purchase them. And I strongly encourage parents to buy products that are BPA free. That are free of brominated flame retardants. When it comes to materials that a family has already spent good money on and that's in the home, I hate to throw things away that are working, and I think a reasonable solution is to purchase a good tight cover made of cloth or plastic that you can put over and around the mattress to keep the brominated flame retardant from getting out.
That's great. And what about the pajamas? Are they usually
pajamas? Try to purchase materials that are free of brominated.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So just start with things that don't have it at all. Right. Okay.
And the thing about pajamas is the capital expense at the front end is a lot less than a mattress. So.
Right. True. We also have a couple of questions about what can you do if and probably when these toxins are already in your system. Can you reverse the effects? That was one person's question. Then someone else sort of had the same question about and thinks feels pretty strongly that her son's ADHD is connected to environmental issues, and with avoidance and detoxing, will any damage ever be erased? Are the effects of this kind of exposure forever? So both, maybe for these specific outcomes like ADHD, but also in general, can we just get them out of our system?
Okay, so I think there's some good news here, so let me go over it with you.
Great.
The good news is that most of these newer chemicals that we've been talking about have a very brief residence time in the human body. Bisphenol A, pesticides, phthalates are all excreted from the human body in a matter of days. And we know that because people at the University of Washington in Seattle, people at the CDC in Atlanta, people at Harvard have done very nice little studies where they had people eat foods that were known to contain BPA every day for a week. Then for the following week, they ate foods that were free of BPA or free of pesticides, and they saw within 2 or 3 days that the level of BPA and the level of pesticides came down by more than 90%. So these chemicals wash out of the human body very, very quickly. That's good news. And what that says to me is that efforts to so-called detoxify the human body by taking certain medications or by taking chelating agents are misplaced and unnecessary. And I strongly recommend against people undergoing chelation therapy. There have actually been deaths caused by the improper use of chelation therapy. It's very dangerous stuff. And people should, instead of trying to get the chemicals out of their body, it's much more sensible and much more effective to keep the chemicals from going into the body in the first place. Now, with regard to the mom who has the child with ADHD that she fears might have been caused by exposure to BPA, I'm not sure there's any way to prove or disprove what chemical caused the child's problems. I certainly wouldn't want to get into that because I've never seen or examined that little child. But what I will say is that educational enrichment programs and tutoring and all these special schools and after-school programs that have been set up around this country to help kids with learning disabilities are very, very effective. I'm not a believer in trying to detoxify kids who have learning disabilities. I think that's not the way to go. As I said a moment ago, it's potentially dangerous because there have been deaths from chelating agent. There's no proof in the medical community that detoxification works. The people who do detoxification are mostly fringe providers, in my opinion, and I wouldn't go that route. But I would strongly encourage any parent who has a child with a learning disability or who suspects that their child has a learning problem to first of all get the child properly evaluated so that a good diagnosis is made and the family knows what they're dealing with, and then proactively, aggressively look around, badger the school board, and get the best learning experience for your child that you can. There's a lot of experience out there that children who have gone through these enrichment programs are much improved. Maybe not completely free of problems, but much improved and much better able to navigate the complexities of modern life.
Great, thank you for that thorough answer. I have another question here that that you, Dr. Lindergan, or maybe Margie from Healthy Child might want to speak to too. We have someone who says that I've been aware of and avoiding these chemicals for over 6 years, thanks to Healthy Child, Healthy World. So that's great to hear. And she says, I try to spread the news, but it seems others don't really get the seriousness of the effects of these chemicals. Is there any advice to help others really consider avoiding these toxins? And I hear there's a lot of kiwi too. You know, like people think I'm crazy. You know, what can I do? Do either of you have any advice on that?
Well, we run into this all the time, and I'm sure Margie does too. People are busy. Everybody's got busy lives. They've got jobs. They've got kids. They've got soccer games. They've got so many things to juggle. And this is scary stuff, and it's very easy for people to say, oh, I can't deal with that. It's just too troublesome. I don't want to go there. And my response to that is, you know, if you do this intelligently, it doesn't take a lot of work. It just requires buying organic instead of buying conventional produce when you go into the food store. It involves not using pesticides on your front lawn or spraying them under the sink. It involves buying a stainless steel drinking cup instead of a plastic cup. They're little things, they're not very expensive, but the cumulative effect is substantial. And I think that one of the most effective strategies for spreading the word and making families aware of the hazard of these chemicals is actually to educate children. It's just as in the case of cigarette smoking, educating children about the dangers of tobacco has proven to be a very, very powerful way of persuading their parents to stop smoking. Same thing here.
Yeah,
Great.
And this is Margie. I appreciate that, Dr. Lindergan. You know, we get a question every day from someone who's really frustrated or upset, either with neighbors or grandparents or even their schools. And the Healthy Child, Healthy World has the 5 simple steps to take, which involve really easy, bite-sized changes you can start to make in your life that make a difference. And you know, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and my home is far from perfect. And you know, I make mistakes or I do things that I wish I didn't do. And when my daughter's really mad at me, she threatens to buy Glade, plug-ins. Like just we all live in our homes that are, we deal with reality every day, and doing everything you can to just keep your home, safe and free of what you can control is a huge step. I mean, it seems small, but it's enormous, because I think, like Dr. Lindergan says, it does lead to changes in your home that you just and others follow your example when they see that it's easy and manageable, and it doesn't take a PhD, to get this work done right.
Right, that's a good point. And remembering that when you do your best, that's great. And then if, your kids are exposed elsewhere, obviously that's concerning, and you wish that other people knew as much as you do, but you're doing your best. That's better than nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have another question sort of along these lines for those of all of us here who are, absolutely on board with all this. You'd mentioned waiting for Washington to update regulations on testing and use of chemicals. And do either of you know if there are any current laws or regulations in the process being updated, that anything we can do to encourage that specifically, or encourage stores to carry safer products? What can we do out in the community?
I think parents can. I've always said that parents can be advocates at three levels. First of all, they can be advocates in their own homes, which is really what we've been talking about today, about what you purchase, what you bring into the home. The second level at which parents can advocate is in the community. Work with the school board, for example, to reduce the use of pesticides in the school and to reduce their use on the playing fields at the school. Work with the city council or the town council in your town to be sure that the streets have sidewalks so that kids can walk safely to school and get healthy exercise and fight obesity. Simple things like that at the local level. And then at the state level and the federal level, the political level, if you want to call it that, people have to be citizens. I think it's been said a long time ago that democracy is not a spectator sport. If you want to bring about changes in a democracy, you have to participate. You have to send letters to your members of Congress and to your senators. In this particular case, Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey has been trying for the past 4 or 5 years to pass legislation called the Safe Chemicals Act, which would require proper testing of new chemicals before they come to market. So far, the forces against that bill have been very strong, and it has not passed. But he is a stalwart warrior, Senator Lautenberg is, and if you visit his website, you can learn about the legislation. My own personal editorial comment here is I think it's a shame that these issues get politicized, Democrat versus Republican. I honestly think that issues like protecting children against toxic chemicals ought to be nonpartisan. Everybody has children regardless of their political party, and it's in all of our interests to raise a healthy generation of the next Americans. So I think it's very important that legislation be passed here.
That's a great reminder. Thank you. Margie, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Lanigan. I love that point about, it's one thing to keep your home as safe as possible, but really there is an obligation on all of us to be citizens of the country and the world, for kids. In addition to the Safe Chemicals Act, which Senator Lautenberg is sponsoring, there is a Safe Cosmetics Act out there in Congress that would clean up your personal care products, which Dr. Lautenberg mentioned, contain phthalates. And just on a note, sometimes being involved in D.C. can be, it's very important, but it's also, there's opportunity at the state level as well. And just this week, for example, Governor Jerry Brown of California announced that he wanted to change that state's flame retardant standards, which actually sets the standard for the country by requiring flame retardants to be added to foam in couches, for example, or your foam furniture. And simply by trying to change the California standard, you may end, the hope is that we'll end up with saner, safer standards for protecting people from fire, but also recognizing that dousing things with chemicals isn't necessarily the answer. So there are opportunities both nationally as well as at the state level to get involved and be active.
That's great. Thank you guys so much. That's really interesting. It's great to remember, there are things we can do at home, and then there are ways to think bigger, too, for those of us who are ready to take that step. So we're about the end of our time here. Is there any final thoughts that Dr. Lanigan, you or Margie Kelly from Healthy Child, Healthy World, that either one of you would like to leave us with?
Well, I would just like to say that even though we've been talking about some scary information this morning, that I'm fundamentally very optimistic. We've already made tremendous progress in this country in reducing children's exposures to hazardous chemicals. We've gotten lead out of gasoline. We've banned DDT. We've gotten rid of some of the most hazardous pesticides. Good actions are being taken every week, like this action that Margie mentioned a moment ago, Governor Brown in California. Parents are getting educated about these issues and are reducing their children's exposure to toxic chemicals. The market penetration of organic produce is going up. Pesticide use is going down. Even though there are problems in front of us, there are many hopeful signs, and I want to encourage parents to do the right thing and thank the parents that are paying attention to these issues.
Thank you. And Margie, any final?
Oh, no, please, no.
That was the perfect way to send us off, I
standard.
think.
Yes, perfect.
I agree. Dr. Lindergan, it's been such an honor to have your expertise and your help here today for all of us. And Margie Kelly, thanks to Healthy Child, Healthy World for bringing him to our Kiwi College audience. So thank you, everybody, for being here today and for joining us. And we'll have the presentation on kiwimagonline.com/college later today if anybody wants